Welcome to the easier way to sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the easier way to sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. I'm going to share with you what I think is a fun and frustrating story. The race to space began in the late 1950s. The Soviet Union and the United States were in the middle of a Cold War, and each nation was on a quest to come in first with the grand prize of a strategic military position above and around the entire Earth. Early on in the manned spaceflight program of both countries, it was discovered that ballpoint pens didn't work in space. Regular old pens are gravity dependent. For the ink to flow to the writing tip, the pen had to be pointed down so gravity could do its work. It's a scientific fact, if you believe in those things, that there is no gravity in outer space. So there was a need for a writing utensil that performed in a zero-gravity environment. Well, the greatest minds at NASA came up with a model of a ballpoint pen that functioned perfectly, gravity or not. NASA astronauts had the freedom to use a pen in outer space. These pens were super expensive, but they worked. The Soviet Union was faced with the same problem, so the greatest minds in the Soviet space program put their heads together and decided to use a different type of zero-gravity writing utensil. A pencil. NASA did great work in creating a device that met their needs. NASA engineers stepped outside of the box and created an effective but cost-heavy answer to a pressing problem. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, stayed in the box. They used one of their available options. The pencil was just as effective as a solution. As a matter of fact, Americans grudgingly tipped their hat to acknowledge this bit of Soviet common sense. You've had the opportunity to listen to the interview with my friend and colleague Andrew Sokol. Part of his marketing strategy suggests you stay inside the box. You're human. You're an explorer. There may be solutions right in front of you, yet you continue your search, not really considering your available alternatives. Your answers are already within your reach, yet you continue your search. You may consider your available alternative, yet think, oh, I don't want to do that. Everyone's doing that. I need to go outside of the box and find something new and different that will help me achieve my desired outcome. Why go outside the box until you've exhausted all the possibilities available to you inside the box? Let's take a look at another communications model that I call the Sales Minefield. This model is diagrammed in your workbook, and if you don't happen to have your workbook handy, I'll do my best to make it clear. The Sales Minefield model is a recipe for an effective conversation. It's a simple story intended to bake this conversation process into your action memory. This specific memory will help you when you find yourself facing an uncertain, an unwilling, or an unconvinced prospect. And you have to remember their perspective. Your prospects are searching for a way to solve their problem, and you might have that solution. And they might be willing to let you provide them with that answer, but they remain hesitant to cross the minefield. Of course they're hesitant. How do they know they're making the right choice by coming across? Traditionally, your job as a salesperson is to tell the prospect that you have the solution, but they need to be willing to cross over the minefield so you can give them a presentation. What if they're hesitant? They'll need convincing, right? How can you get them to understand that their solution lies with you? The solution that they're waiting for is on your side of this allegorical minefield. You're asking them to disregard their societal vision of the selling routine that's about to take place. Your sales strategy is designed to get them to come across the minefield. And you're trying to get them to come across the minefield for your reasons, so they remain reluctant. What's inside this minefield that causes their reluctance? Well, the minefield is littered with skepticism and the memory of sales experiences and challenges that they've faced personally or have heard about from others. The prospect views the challenges in the minefield as inconvenient, costly, irritating, or possibly intimidating. The same type of challenges occur for you, me, and every other consumer who doesn't want to be sold to. So what do? Traditional selling has you, the salesperson, stand on your side of the minefield, waving and saying quite confidently, "Come across. Everything is going to be fine. Don't worry about those mines. We'll talk you across. We have experience. You can count on us." But seriously, unless and until your prospect has a dire need to come across the minefield, they're going to be hesitant. You can understand their lack of enthusiasm. It's easy to imagine the prospect saying, "You're going to talk me through a minefield? You've got to be kidding." It's at this point that the salesperson in us feels the need to sell, convince, and influence even harder. "Of course it's okay for you to come through the minefield," we say. "We have a very successful track record in getting people across." If indeed your track record is all the prospect is concerned about, they might be so impressed that they just say, "What the heck?" and come across. In most situations, that's not the case. In most sales settings, prospects continue to voice their considerations and objections. They decline to come across the divide by offering inauthentic responses like "maybe" and "I want to think about it." They resist coming across, and the sales game goes on. Everything I've shared with you regarding the easier way to sell supports the notion that your prospect will come across the minefield once again for their reasons, not yours. Rather than explain to them why you believe it's a good idea for them to come across, this model reminds you that your job is to turn the table. Instead of convincing them, ask the right questions and really listen. Listen for and allow the prospects to inform you and clarify their most urgent reasons for coming across at all. People love to talk. Let them talk. Help them talk. Remember to ditch your pitch and just listen. Your job is to curiously, authentically, and neutrally help them decide if they need to come across at all. Focus your attention on their reasons for coming across. Ask powerful, open-ended questions. Why do you want to come across? What would be sacrificed by remaining where you are? What happened when you've tried coming across before? What would have to be different for you to come across now? You'll discover that their truths and beliefs are far more critical to the outcome than yours. Remember, the reasons you believe they should come across are irrelevant. If you say it, it's selling. If they say it, it's true. Let them talk. But the ask questions and let them talk approach doesn't really line up with traditional features and benefit selling, does it? Because of your show and tell style of selling, you've been using selling strategies to bring prospects across the minefield. Simply stated, a selling strategy is what and how a salesperson communicates to a prospect. The strategic intention is causing the prospect to buy or do something. On the other hand, a buying strategy is formed by and through a prospect's internal belief system. These beliefs tell humans when it's okay and appropriate to buy or do something. If they believe they need it, if they feel they need it, they will buy. But in some cases, your selling strategy lines up perfectly with the buyer's buying strategy. The unfortunate truth is that when that happens, many salespeople believe they've done a good job selling, and it frustrates the heck out of them when they sell the same identical way to the next prospect and no sale occurs. I urge you to give up your selling strategies. My coaching? Give up the need to sell entirely. Give up the need, but not the commitment to sell. It's your job to sell an appropriate product or service to a buyer who's ready, willing, and able to buy and wants to buy from you. But once you need to make a sale, and you know what I'm talking about, when you have a need to make a sale, and I believe the term is make your nut, you will become tied to the outcome. Your urgency will lead you right back to selling strategies, and you will mostly make sales to those whose buying strategies are a match. Have an authentic conversation with your prospect. If your prospect presumes a minefield between themselves and their solution, remember to ask the type of open-ended questions we discussed earlier. Listen carefully to their answers, and listen carefully to what I'm about to say. When you ask the right questions, you'll be told everything your prospect needs to hear to begin their journey across the minefield. Once again, as counterintuitive and as backwards as that sounds, that's how the system works. Following the guidelines of the easier way to sell will most assuredly help you avoid the sales resistance formed by dueling strategies. You'll bypass this resistance altogether. As a navigator, you're going to walk over to your prospects, you're going to take them by the arm, and bring them safely through what they perceive to be a minefield. Your questions direct them on a path they didn't realize existed. It's a path they didn't know about. Your questions help them explain why and how your product and service will solve their problem. And because of the nature of your communication, they pass safely by and oblivious to the obstacles or challenges that may have troubled them earlier. Just as in our story of the wall, once your prospect is safely across the minefield and looks back, they no longer see their challenges or concerns. As a matter of fact, they no longer see a minefield. They realize there was never a minefield at all. Your system-based conversation is a new and different way of making prospects feel welcome, safe, and comfortable working with you. It's the easier way to sell. Okay, let's continue our discussion of the yes formula and specifically the prelude and the beginning of the Q section of Quick. The yes formula is the foundation of the entire system known as the easier way to sell. One of the 5 ingredients is known as Quick. The first letter of Quick, Q, stands for qualify, and as we discussed earlier, the Q really stands for disqualify. What do we mean by that? You want your conversation to create a pathway to yes, and on the other hand, you're looking for signs that might lead you to disqualify them as a viable prospect. The prelude section of Q is designed to uncover where on the bell curve this person or people might show up. In the Q stage, you'll briefly share an overview of all of the Quick guidelines. This clarifies to the prospect the parameters of your conversation and why it might be beneficial to all parties if everyone plays by the same ground rules. Remember to maintain your focus on solving their problem and not yours. Uncover a no that was going to happen anyway and avoid creating a no. Build and maintain relationship. Listen. Ask open-ended questions. Be a diagnostician and avoid problem clients. Well, now that that's out of the way, here's the prelude and the Q section of Quick. Okay, man or woman prospect. Before we begin our conversation, I'm not sure whether you have a need for what I provide because I don't have enough information yet. So if it's okay, I'd like to ask you a few questions and you might have some for me. And based on my experience, within a few minutes, we'll know whether or not there's a reason for us to move forward. Is that an okay way for us to start? And if anywhere in our conversation you come to the conclusion that what we offer is not what you're looking for, how comfortable will you be telling me that? Great. And what I'd really like to do is avoid ending our conversation with you saying, maybe, or I want to think about it. And I bring this up because sometimes people will say, maybe, or I want to think about it as a polite substitute for what? Remember to gesture your hand towards the prospect and wait for their answer. It's fine if you really need to think about it or need more information before we proceed, but my request is that you avoid using maybe or I want to think about it as a substitute for no. Is that okay? And if it turns out that you do have a need for what we offer and you're going to be the judge of that, we're going to have to discuss your budget. If we get to that point, how willing are you to share what kind of dollars you have set aside for this project? And I'm just talking ballpark figures. Next in our conversation, we determine if we're meeting someone who's in a position where they can only say no. So if it turns out that we get that far in the process, who besides yourself would be involved in the decision to move forward, or is it up to you alone? If they tell you that someone else is necessary, request those people be present in the meeting. If those additional decision makers can't be present, either reschedule or face the fact that you may have to repeat this whole process at a later date. If still no dice, set up this agreement to gauge a non-decision maker's interest. I have a favor to ask. At the end of our conversation, I'd like to know if it were up to you whether you would work with me or not. If they say they are the ones that make the decision, verify that information. Ask, so no spouse, significant other, business partner, or accountant would be involved in a decision to move forward? Now, it might be a board of directors. Be sure to make this industry specific and you know best who'd be involved in your transaction. But if they still say, nobody else, I can make the decision myself, move on and file their answer away for a later reference. I'm always curious about the motives and reasons for buying or not buying and would really appreciate hearing your thoughts one way or the other. Is that okay? If they've agreed to all your MBAs, you'll begin the final step before your sales interview. You ask the prospect, would they like to speak first or would they prefer that you started? If they choose to go first, let them. If they ask you to go first, it's time for your first question, which is, when you decided to take the time to talk to me, what were you hoping I might be able to do for you? You've just completed the prelude and qualifying sections of the easier way to sell. Go back over this segment and really learn it. And if you're interested in hearing all of the steps in the easier way to sell, I invite you to go back and listen to episodes 1 through 10 again and again. I had just finished recording a segment for this episode when my wife came into the office. She had listened to me discussing the power and wonder of uncovering a no that was going to happen anyway. Jenny said to me, when you ask people to uncover a no that was going to happen anyway, it seems inherently dismissive. Yes, she talks like that. I keep reminding you to employ your newly discovered ability to determine when someone has a need for what you offer or not. And because I believe this is so important to the system, I might have overlooked the implications of the or not. You and I know that this system is formulated as a curiosity-based neutral communication, and your ability to uncover a no that was going to happen anyway is an important aspect of the entire yes formula. But I thought about it for a moment and realized, as usual, that my brilliant wife had a point. If you're interpreting the no you've uncovered as a signal to move on to the next person, you may want to reframe the process of uncovering a no. Just because someone disqualifies themselves as a candidate for your product or service, that doesn't mean you still can't help them through your network of connections. There's a training book out there called Getting to Yes. I actually thought about calling this training Getting to Know. However, this is not about getting to know. This system is about uncovering a no that was going to happen anyway. And if you look at the qualification process as a way of getting a no so you can move on, you may be stepping on the most important question of this system, which is, whose problem are you trying to solve? By uncovering a no and dismissing the person as someone you've finished with, misses the point of being of assistance and being of service. In last week's interview with Dr. Mark Goulston, he talked about having conversations that, in and of themselves, occur as pattern interrupts. They would occur as pattern interrupts because he would meet with people, but he wouldn't try to sell anything, even when he could. His goal was to find out what the person needed and then offer himself as a conduit between that need and its resolution. Just as I coached you, he positioned himself somewhere between the present state and the desired state of the person with whom he was communicating. He placed himself in that position as an attempt to help that person get what they said they wanted, even if that goal did not include him or his service. It's really a selfless communication. So, the next time you go out and use the system to uncover a no that was going to happen anyway, remember that you're disqualifying the individual as a recipient of your problem-solving magic rather than disqualifying them as a person. They are humans who have needs that may not be addressed by your menu of services. Listen for what they really need, and if you can assist, great. If not, you listened. Which leads me to another of the easier way to sell footnotes. Even though who you're being is of service and of assistance, avoid problem clients. It was a bunch of years ago, but then again, everything I remember is a bunch of years ago now. It was in the mid-1990s, and I conducted what I guess would be called a sales mastermind. It was actually called the Closers Club, and we met twice a week. We started the Closers Club at 6:30 on Monday morning, and it went till 9 a.m. We met Tuesday evening from 6:30 until 9, and these were students from all over Southern California. I even had one Closers Club member who would drive back and forth from Victorville, California to Van Nuys, California every Monday morning and every Tuesday evening. These were business people who'd already gone through my training. They decided they wanted to stay sharp or get sharper with the system. Members gained useful insights from other club members, and these were people that were committed to the system as their way of communicating. Each member had the opportunity to talk about the prior week and share what was working and what needed more attention. But first, each member was asked to share their biggest win. What's crazy is that I have audio tapes of all these Closers Clubs stored away, but that's another episode. A man whose name I think was Michael told us that he was asked to take part in a role play of a sales call at his insurance company. The company actually had a sales contest, and Michael won the contest. He told us that he used the system and everybody else followed the guidelines of their traditional sales script. Well, as a contest, it turned out to be no contest, and the other people in the office wanted to know what he was doing and how in the world he had found out about this sales technique. But he didn't want to tell them. You know why? He was concerned that if everyone in his office knew about the system, they'd be just as effective as he was. The moral of this story is, tell your friends about this podcast. And Jenny says it's easier to communicate the idea of a podcast if you call it an internet radio show. So, there you go. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I trust you found it as informative as I intended it to be. Practice. Be courageous. Be committed. Think of that guy driving back and forth from Victorville to Van Nuys. He was committed. He did it because he wanted to. This is Ike Krieger. See you next time.